He adopted a stray dog, shocked, when a beautiful black widow came to his ranch looking for it. The story goes that she was running for 3 days before she even knew what direction she was headed. All she knew was away from the smell of stale beer and unwashed men, away from the creak of the floorboard outside her door, the one that meant he was coming, away from the name they gave her, a name spat like tobacco juice, a brand on her soul just as sure as the one they'd seared into her skin. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the cracked earth, and the dust was a living thing. It coated her tongue, filled her lungs, turned the sweat on her face into a gritty mask. She was a thing of dust and bone and fear, a scarecrow fleeing a field that had only ever grown misery. Her feet were raw, the cheap shoes she'd stolen having given up on the second day, and she'd been barefoot ever since, the soles of her feet a mess of blisters and cuts. She didn't feel it, though. Pain was an old friend, a constant companion. What she felt was the silence. The vast, empty silence of the high desert was a new kind of terror. In the place she'd left, there was always noise. The guttural laughter, the angry shouts, the thin sound of a woman crying in the next room. Here, the only sound was the scuff of her own feet and the ragged pull of her own breath. And the dog. The dog was her shadow, her only comfort. A scruffy, one-eyed mutt she'd found whimpering in a ditch a week before she'd finally found the nerve to run. She'd shared her scraps with it, and in return, it had licked the tears from her face in the dead of night. It was the only creature in that whole God-forsaken place that had ever shown her a kindness, without wanting something in return. She called it scrap, because that's what they both were, discarded things. But now, scrap was gone. In the gray light of dawn, as she'd stumbled through a shallow, muddy creek, a pair of headlights had sliced through the darkness. She'd thrown herself into the reeds, heart hammering against her ribs. A raw scream caught in her throat. The truck had rumbled past, slow, methodical. A spotlight cut across the landscape. She'd pressed her face into the mud, praying. When the truck was gone, a faint red glow disappearing over the rise, she'd called for him. A hoarse whisper. Scrap? Nothing. The silence had returned, but now it was heavier. It was the silence of being truly, completely alone. She'd spent the rest of the day looking for him, calling his name until her voice was gone. A dry rasp that hurt her throat. The hope dwindled with the light, shrinking until it was a tiny, cold pebble in her gut. He was gone. Another thing taken from her. The thought broke something inside her. For 3 days she'd run on fear and adrenaline. But now, a different fuel took over. A cold, hard rage. They had taken everything from her, her name, her freedom, years of her life. They had turned her into an animal, and now they had taken her dog. She didn't know who was in that truck, but in her mind, it was them. It was always them. So she kept walking, no longer running away, but walking toward something. She didn't know what it was, didn't know this land, didn't know where a road might lead, but she followed the tire tracks in the dirt, a grim pilgrim on a road to nowhere. The dust, the sweat, the pain, the silence, it was all the same, but now there was a purpose to it. She would find her dog. It was a stupid, hopeless thought, a stray mutt in the middle of this endless, brutal country, but it was the only thought she had left, the only thing that wasn't broken. It was a piece of her, and she was going to get it back. The sun set, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for a world this ugly. She stumbled on, a silhouette against the dying light, not knowing she was walking straight toward the one place in all that emptiness that might just save her, or finish the job of destroying her completely. Now, this story is just getting started, and I promise you, it gets a whole lot more intense from here. Before we get back to it, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from down in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're hooked already and you want to see how this plays out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. All right, let's get back to the desert. Cole first saw the dog when he was riding the fence line on the west pasture. Just a flicker of movement near the dry creek bed. Looked like a coyote at first, all ribs and matted fur. He raised his rifle, squinting, but then it limped into the open and he saw the one eye and the pathetic droop of its tail. Not a coyote, just a sorry-looking stray. He wasn't a soft man. The ranch had beaten any softness out of him years ago, the same way the sun and the wind beat the moisture out of the land, leaving it hard and cracked. He lived alone, worked alone, and preferred it that way. People were trouble. They brought noise and need and complications. He had enough of all that buried under the wooden cross on the hill overlooking the house. Still, he didn't shoot. He just watched. The dog drank from a muddy puddle, its whole body trembling with the effort. It looked up, saw him, and froze. It didn't run. It just lay down, put its head on its paws, and waited, as if it knew the score, knew it was too tired to run and was leaving the next move up to fate. Cole grunted, lowering the rifle. "Damn thing's given up," he muttered to his horse. He wasn't going to take it in. No, sir. He had his own animals to feed, his own problems. But he couldn't just leave it there to die either. He dismounted, pulling a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. He tossed it a few feet from the dog. The dog didn't move. It just watched him with its one good eye, a deep, knowing brown. Cole waited. The silence stretched. Finally, the dog crept forward, snatched the jerky, and retreated to its spot, gobbling it down in 2 bites. Cole got back on his horse. "Don't follow me," he said, more to himself than the dog. But of course it did. It kept a respectful distance, limping along behind his horse all the way back to the ranch house, a dusty, persistent shadow. When he got to the corral, he swung down and turned. The dog stopped 20 feet away, sat on its haunches, and waited again. Cole stared at it for a long minute. "Hell," he said to no one. He went into the house, came back with a bowl of water and a scoop of leftover stew. He set them down on the edge of the porch. "That's all you're getting. Find a spot in the barn. Earn your keep, chase the snakes." The dog crept forward, drank the water like it was the finest whiskey, and ate the stew. Then it looked at him, gave a single soft thump of its tail against the dust, and limped toward the barn. Cole watched it go. He felt a pang of something he didn't want to name. Annoyance, he told himself. Just another complication. He went inside, the familiar silence of his house feeling a little less empty, and he didn't like it one bit. 2 days later, she appeared. He was on the porch, cleaning his saddle, the dog, who he'd started calling Scrap in his own mind, dozing at his feet. He saw her coming from a long way off, a shimmering dot in the heat haze. As she got closer, he saw she wasn't much more than a girl, or a woman who'd been worn down to look like one. She was thin, dressed in rags, moving with a grim determination that spoke of desperation. She didn't see him at first. Her eyes were fixed on the barn. Then Scrap lifted his head, let out a soft whine, and trotted off the porch toward her. The woman stopped. Her whole body went rigid. And then she saw the dog, and something in her broke. She fell to her knees, and the dog was on her, licking her face, whining, tail going crazy. She wrapped her arms around its scruffy neck and just held on, her shoulders shaking. Cole didn't move. He sat there with the saddle soap in his hand, a silent witness to a reunion he didn't understand. She finally looked up and saw him. Her eyes were wide, full of a fear so profound it was almost animal. She looked like a doe that had just stumbled into a wolf's den. He could see the fight in them, though. She got to her feet slowly, pulling the dog behind her, shielding it with her body. She was ready to bolt or to fight. He could see the calculations happening behind those haunted eyes. Cole slowly put down the rag and the soap. He didn't stand up. He didn't want to spook her. He just looked at her, then at the dog. "That your dog?" he asked. His voice was rough from disuse. She flinched at the sound of it, but she nodded. A tight, jerky motion. "He's been here 2 days," Cole said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, trembling slightly, one hand buried in the dog's fur. He saw the marks on her then, the fading bruises on her arms, the raw, rope-burn look of her wrists. He saw the exhaustion that was bone deep, the kind that sleep couldn't fix. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this was the worst kind, the kind that follows a person. He should have told her to take her dog and go, sent her on her way. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing, but he looked at the way she was holding on to that mutt, like it was the last solid thing on earth, and he remembered the way the dog had just laid down and given up by the creek. He remembered the feeling of utter loneliness that had been his own companion for 5 years. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "There's a well pump round back. Food in the barn is for the livestock. You can have the loft. For the night." He picked up his rag again, turning his attention back to the saddle. A clear dismissal. He didn't look to see her reaction. He just listened. After a long moment, he heard her bare feet scuffing the dirt as she led the dog toward the barn. He hadn't invited her in. He hadn't offered comfort, but he hadn't turned her away either. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his empty yard, he knew he had just invited a whole world of trouble onto his land. That first night was a thing of silence and shadows. He didn't go out to the barn again. He cooked his dinner, the same simple meal of beans and bacon he ate most nights, and he ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the dark shape of the barn. He could feel her out there. It was like a hum in the air, a disturbance in the quiet rhythm of his life. He thought about locking his door for the first time in years, but the thought felt shameful, so he left it. He slept in his chair, the shotgun propped next to him. Not because he was afraid of her, but because he was afraid of what might be following her. The next morning, he was up before the sun. He made coffee, his usual routine, but everything felt different. He walked out onto the porch, the air crisp and cool. The dog, Scrap, was lying by the barn door, and it thumped its tail when it saw him. There was no sign of the girl. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over. He peeked inside the barn. The air was thick with the smell of hay and animal sweat. In the dim light, he could see her. She was asleep in the hayloft, curled into a tight ball, the dog nestled beside her. She looked impossibly small, almost like a child. He saw a bucket he'd left near the stalls and had an idea. He went back to the house, heated water on the stove, and poured it into the bucket. He found an old bar of soap and a clean, worn-out rag. He carried it all back to the barn and set it down just inside the door. He also brought a bowl of the same stew he'd made for the dog, along with a tin cup of water and a piece of bread. He set it beside the bucket. He didn't call to her or try to wake her. He just left the offering and walked away. It was a practical gesture. Wounds needed cleaning. An empty stomach needed filling. It wasn't kindness, he told himself. It was just common sense. You take in a stray, you have to care for it. He spent the morning doing his chores, trying to ignore the presence in his barn. He mended a harness, his hands moving with familiar, practiced motions. He fixed a loose board on the corral fence. He worked with a deliberate focus, trying to sweat out the unease. Around mid-morning, he saw her emerge from the barn. She moved slowly, cautiously, like an animal venturing out of its den. Her hair was wet, combed back with her fingers. She was wearing the same rags, but she looked cleaner. She saw him by the corral and froze. She was holding the empty bowl. She just stood there for a long moment, clutching it to her chest. Cole finished hammering a nail into the fence post and turned to face her. He didn't smile, he just nodded. "Stew's in the pot on the stove," he said, his voice flat. "Help yourself. There's work to be done if you plan on staying." He hadn't decided if she was staying. The words just came out. She just stared at him, her eyes wide. He couldn't read her expression, gratitude, fear. It was all mixed up. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked toward the house, moving with the careful, quiet steps of someone who was afraid of leaving tracks. Cole watched her go. He felt a strange pull, a sense of responsibility he hadn't asked for and didn't want. He was a man who had built walls around his life, thick and high. And this strange, broken woman had just walked right through them without even trying. He picked up his hammer and went back to work, hitting the nails with more force than was necessary. The ritual of labor was his only defense. Food, water, shelter, work. These were the only things he had to offer. They were simple, solid things. He hoped they would be enough to build some kind of trust, because sentiment and soft words were things he no longer possessed. They were buried on the hill, and he had no intention of digging them up. The days fell into a rough, unspoken routine. She did not speak. He did not ask her to. The silence between them was a landscape of its own, vast and empty. But slowly, things began to grow in it. He'd leave work for her to do, weeding the small vegetable patch his wife had planted years ago, sweeping the porch, mending feed sacks with a needle and thread he left for her on the kitchen table. Her hands were clumsy at first, but she was a quick learner. She worked with a silent, desperate intensity, as if her life depended on proving her worth. He would find the tasks completed, the tools put away neatly. It was her way of talking, of saying thank you. One afternoon, he was sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a set of shears when she came and sat on the far end of the porch. She just sat there watching him work. Scrap came and lay down in the dust between them, a furry bridge. For a long time, the only sounds were the scrape of the whetstone on steel and the buzzing of flies. My wife, Sarah, she planted those flowers, he said, nodding toward a patch of stubborn, sun-scorched roses near the porch. He didn't know why he said it. The words just rose up from some deep, dusty place inside him. She loved this place, said it was honest. The girl didn't look at him, but he saw her hands tighten in her lap. He kept sharpening the shears. Car crash. 5 years ago this spring. Drunk driver on the county road. I buried her myself up on that hill. He pointed with the whetstone. Figured she'd still want to see the sunrise. He fell silent again, a little shocked at himself. He hadn't spoken about Sarah to another living soul in years. It felt strange, like using a muscle that had atrophied. He expected the girl to say nothing, to just get up and leave. But after another long silence, she spoke. Her voice was a low, rough whisper, like stones rubbing together. They called me Spider. He stopped his work and looked at her. She was staring straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Because of this, she pulled up the ragged sleeve of her shirt. On her shoulder was a crude, ugly tattoo, a spider inked in black. It looked like a brand. The man who bought me, he liked spiders, said they were patient, said they knew how to wait. He kept me in a room for 2 years. Before him, there was another man and another place. I don't remember much before that. Just bits and pieces, a yellow dress, the smell of rain on hot pavement. She spoke in a flat monotone, reciting facts, not telling a story. It was a confession delivered without emotion, a catalog of horrors laid bare in the afternoon sun. They didn't call me by a name, just girl or you. The spider was the closest thing I had to a name for a long time. She let her sleeve fall. I ran when he brought in a new girl. She couldn't have been more than 15. I saw the look in her eyes, the same look I had. I couldn't watch it happen again. So I took the dog and I ran. She stopped, her breathing shallow. That was it. That was her story, delivered in plain, broken language. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for pity. She just stated it, a truth as solid and as brutal as the land around them. Cole put down the shears. He looked at the brand on her shoulder, hidden again beneath the rags. He looked at his own hands, calloused and scarred from work. He looked at the grave on the hill. Their wounds were different. Their ghosts wore different faces, but the pain was the same. A shared, silent understanding passed between them. He had lost his world. She had never been allowed to have one. He picked up the shears again, the familiar weight a comfort. The well pump's got a loose handle, he said, his voice as gruff as ever. Gonna need to fix it before it gives out. It was all he could offer. A return to the practical, a way to move forward. She gave a small nod, and for the first time, he thought he saw something other than fear in her eyes. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a start. The first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday. Cole had seen the dust cloud from miles away, a telltale plume rising from the county road. It was moving too fast for a rancher checking his herd. It was a vehicle, and it was heading straight for his turnoff. He was in the yard, replacing a rotted post, the girl nearby, stacking firewood. He saw the look on her face before she even saw the dust. A primal fear. Her eyes went wide, her body tensed. She was a deer scenting a wolf on the wind. Inside, he said, his voice low and sharp. Barn. Now. She didn't hesitate. She dropped the wood and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the barn like a ghost. Scrap, who had been dozing in the sun, got to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Cole grabbed the shotgun he kept, leaned against the porch rail. He didn't chamber around. Not yet. Just held it. He stood by the new post, leaning on his shovel, looking like a man interrupted from his work. Nothing more. A battered black pickup truck rattled up his long driveway and skidded to a stop, kicking up a spray of gravel. 2 men got out. They were big, soft around the middle, with mean little eyes that took in everything. The driver had a greasy ponytail and a stained t-shirt. The passenger was shorter, broader, with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck. Cole's gut tightened when he saw it. "Howdy," the driver said, his voice a slick, unpleasant drawl. "Looking for some help? You the owner of this fine establishment?" Cole didn't answer the question. He just stared, his face a granite mask. "This is private property." "Oh, we know," the man said, holding his hands up in a gesture of false peace. "Just looking for something of ours that went missing. Real valuable piece of property. Thought it might have wandered this way." The second man walked a few steps closer, his eyes scanning the ranch. "Answers to girl," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Skinny thing, dark hair, might have a dog with her." Scrap growled again from the barn doorway, a deeper, more threatening sound this time. The man's eyes snapped to the barn. "Well now, what's that?" "My dog," Cole said, his voice level. "He don't like strangers." "Is that so?" The driver took a step forward. "We hear you're a man who keeps to himself, mister. Don't cause no trouble. We ain't looking for none. We just want our property back. We'll even pay you for your trouble. A finder's fee." Cole's hand tightened on the shotgun. He could feel her in that barn. He could feel her terror like a physical presence. These were the men. He knew it with a certainty that was cold and hard in his belly. This was the trouble he knew would come. He had lived his life by a simple code. Mind his own business, stay out of other people's fights. That code had kept him safe. It had kept him alone. But looking at these two vultures, smelling the rot that clung to them, he felt that code cracking. "Ain't seen no girl," he said, his voice like gravel. "Ain't seen nothing but sun and dust for a month. Now get off my land." The driver's smile vanished. His eyes went cold. "That's your final answer." Cole shifted his weight. A small movement, but it was enough. The shotgun was no longer just leaning. It was ready. The man with the neck tattoo took another step. "Maybe we should have a look in that barn, just to be sure." A beat of silence, hot, tense, the world seemed to stop. The buzz of the flies, the heat on his neck, the growl of the dog. Then Cole moved. Fast. He racked the shotgun. The shuck-shuck sound was brutally loud in the quiet yard. It was a sound that needed no translation. Both men froze. The driver's eyes widened. The other one took a half step back. "I said," Cole repeated, his voice dangerously low, "get off my land." For a long second, nobody moved. It was a standoff, 2 against 1. But one had a shotgun and the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. The driver finally broke, raising his hands again. All right. Easy now. No need for that. We're going." They backed away slowly, got into the truck, their eyes never leaving Cole. The driver started the engine, spun the tires in the dirt, and roared back down the driveway, leaving a cloud of angry dust behind. Cole stood there, shotgun in hand, until the dust settled and the silence returned. He didn't lower the gun. He knew they'd be back. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. He had just declared war. The departure of the truck didn't bring relief. It left behind a thick, heavy tension that settled over the ranch like a shroud. Cole knew they hadn't been scared off for good. Men like that didn't just give up. They saw his lone ranch as a soft target, and his defiance as an insult. They would be back, and they'd come better prepared. He found her in the darkest corner of the barn, huddled behind a stack of old hay bales. She was shaking so badly her teeth were chattering. Scrap was pressed against her, a warm, solid anchor in her sea of terror. When she saw him, she flinched as if expecting a blow. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "They're gone." He just walked over to the wall where he kept a spare rifle, an old .30-30 he hadn't used in years. He checked the action, made sure it was clean. He walked back and held it out to her. She stared at it as if it were a snake. "You need to know how to use this," he said. His tone was not gentle. It was hard, practical. This was not a choice. It was a necessity. I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll teach you," he cut her off. "Get up." He took her out behind the barn, where the land sloped down into a dry gully. He set up a few empty cans on a fence post 50 yards away. For the next hour, he showed her how to hold the rifle, how to brace it against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe. His instructions were blunt, physical. He would move her hand, adjust her stance, his touch impersonal and focused. "Don't pull the trigger, squeeze it. Slow. Let the gun surprise you." The first time she fired, the recoil slammed the stock into her shoulder, knocking her back a step. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 10 feet from the cans. She cried out, a small sound of pain and frustration. "Again," he said, his voice unchanging. She fired again, and again. Her shoulder was going to be a mess of purple bruises, but she didn't complain. She just reloaded, set her jaw, and aimed. Slowly, her shots got closer. She wasn't a natural, but she had a grim determination that he respected. While she practiced, he worked. He boarded up the back window of the house, the one that faced the road. He brought in extra water from the well, filled every spare container he had. He checked the perimeter of his land, looking for tracks, for any sign they were being watched. They fell into a new rhythm, one dictated by survival. They worked together during the day, a silent team. He'd be on the roof, checking for loose shingles, and she'd be below, handing him tools. She learned to milk the one cow he kept, her hands surprisingly gentle. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits, how to find the edible roots that grew near the creek bed. One evening, as they were mending a section of fence that had been damaged by a rock slide, the ground gave way beneath him. It wasn't a long fall, just a few feet into a shallow ditch, but he landed hard on his ankle, a sharp, white-hot pain shooting up his leg. He cried out, a raw curse tearing from his throat. Before he could even process what had happened, she was there. She slid down into the ditch beside him without a moment's hesitation. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and focused. She looked at his ankle, which was already starting to swell. She didn't panic. She looked up at the fence line. "The wire," she said, her first unsolicited words that weren't a memory or a confession. He didn't understand. "What?" "To hold it. The wire." She scrambled back up the embankment, found the roll of baling wire he'd been using and grabbed the cutters. She came back and, with surprising strength, helped him sit up. She took his bandana from his neck and soaked it with water from his canteen. She wrapped it tightly around his ankle, then used 2 sturdy sticks she found as a makeshift splint, securing them with the baling wire. Her movements were quick, efficient. He just watched, gritting his teeth against the pain. When she was done, she put her shoulder under his arm. "Come on," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Leaning on her, he managed to hobble back to the house. She was stronger than she looked, a wiry strength born of hardship. He collapsed into a chair in the kitchen, sweat beading on his forehead. She brought him a glass of water, then went to fetch the small first aid kit from the bathroom. She cleaned the scrapes on his leg, her touch gentle but firm. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted. He, the protector, was now the one being cared for. She, the helpless victim, was now the one in control. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The shared struggle, the raw physical reality of their situation, had forged a bond deeper than words. He was no longer just a reluctant savior, and she was no longer just a stray he'd taken in. They were 2 people against the world, bound together by the simple, brutal instinct to survive. And as he sat there watching her move around his kitchen, her face set in a look of quiet competence, he realized he wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. He was fighting for her. The trip to town was a necessity. His ankle was bad, a nasty sprain that needed a proper brace, and they were running low on essentials: coffee, flour, and most importantly, shotgun shells. He knew it was a risk. The town of Dusty Redemption was a small place, a closed circuit of gossip and suspicion. Strangers were noticed, and a man like Cole, who hadn't set foot in the general store in months, showing up with a haunted-looking woman, would be the talk of the town for a week. But there was no choice. He drove the old pickup, his foot throbbing with every press of the clutch. She sat in the passenger seat, silent, staring out the window, her hands twisting a loose thread on her jeans, a pair of Sarah's he'd given her. They fit her loosely, but they were better than the rags she'd arrived in. As they pulled onto Redemption's main street, he could feel the eyes on them. Old man Hemlock, sitting in his usual chair outside the feed store, stopped rocking and stared. 2 women gossiping by the post office fell silent, their heads turning in unison. The town watched them like a hawk watches a field mouse. Inside Miller's general store, the air was thick with the smell of sawdust and judgment. Mrs. Miller, a woman with a face like a clenched fist, gave them a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Cole," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. Been a while. What can I get for you? Need a brace for my ankle. And some supplies, he said, handing her a list. As Mrs. Miller gathered the items, the girl stood near the door, trying to make herself as small as possible. She kept her eyes down, her arms crossed over her chest. 2 local ranch hands, lanky boys who thought they were men, came in. They saw her and their conversation dropped to a low, snickering murmur. "Look what Cole dragged in," one of them said, just loud enough to be heard. "Looks like she's seen some hard miles." The other one laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Wonder what he keeps her for out on that ranch of his. Must get lonely." The girl flinched as if struck. Her face, already pale, lost all its color. Cole saw the exchange. He saw the cruelty in the boy's eyes and the shame and fear that washed over her. His first instinct was to ignore it, to finish his business and leave. That was the old Cole, the man who didn't get involved. But something inside him snapped. He turned from the counter, his bad ankle screaming in protest, and faced the 2 ranch hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The look on his face was enough. "You boys have something to say?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. The first boy, emboldened by his friend, smirked. "Just making an observation, old man. Didn't know you took in strays." Cole took a slow, deliberate step toward them. He was older, and he was injured, but there was a violence coiled in him that they had never seen before. The air in the store went still and cold. "This stray," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "is with me. And if you ever speak about her again, if you even look at her again, I will break your jaw. Do you understand me?" The smirk vanished from the boy's face, replaced by a flicker of fear. He looked at his friend, who was suddenly very interested in a display of canned peaches. He looked back at Cole's eyes and saw no bluff there, only a cold, hard promise. "Yeah," the boy mumbled, looking at the floor. "We understand." "Good," Cole said. He turned back to the counter where Mrs. Miller was staring, her mouth slightly agape. He put the money for the supplies on the counter. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He walked over to the girl, who was still frozen by the door, and gently put his hand on the small of her back. It was a simple gesture, but it was public. It was a declaration. He guided her out of the store, his touch both a comfort and a shield. As they walked back to the truck, the silence of the street was absolute. Every eye was on them, but no one said a word. They had seen the recluse, the quiet man from the hills, draw a line in the sand, and they knew better than to cross it. The attack came 3 nights later, just as he knew it would. The moon was a sliver in a black sky, and the wind was howling, a mournful sound that rattled the windows and covered any noise the intruders might make. But Cole was ready. He hadn't really slept in days, his senses honed to a razor's edge. He was sitting in the dark of his living room, the shotgun across his lap, when he heard it. Not a sound exactly. A feeling, a change in the rhythm of the night. Scrap, lying by the hearth, lifted his head and let out a low, almost inaudible growl, the fur on his back standing up. That was all the confirmation Cole needed. He moved silently to the window, peering out into the swirling dust. He saw them then. 3 figures, moving low and fast, coming from the direction of the road. They weren't using flashlights. They knew their way. It was the 2 from before, the driver with the ponytail and the man with the spiderweb tattoo on his neck. And they had a 3rd man with them, bigger than the other 2. They were heading for the barn. He had made a choice. After the trip to town, he had moved her into the house, into Sarah's old room. He couldn't leave her out there, a target in the dark. He had told himself it was a tactical decision. Safer to have everyone in one defensible position. But he knew it was more than that. He crept to the bedroom door and pushed it open. She was already awake, sitting up in bed, the .30-30 clutched in her hands. Her face was a pale oval in the darkness, her eyes huge. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't make a sound unless they get in the house. You hear me?" She nodded, her whole body rigid with terror. "Shoot at anything that comes through that door that isn't me." He slipped back into the living room and went to the back door, the one that led out toward the barn. He had broken his vow of non-involvement in town. Tonight, he was going to shatter it completely. He had lived a life trying to avoid violence, to keep the war he'd brought home from overseas locked away. But they had brought the war to him. They had brought it to her. He slipped out the back door, melting into the shadows. He circled around the woodpile, his bad ankle a dull, protesting ache. He could hear them now, whispering near the barn door. "She's in there," one of them said. "I know it, we'll smoke her out." He saw the flicker of a lighter. They had a torch, a rag wrapped around a stick and soaked in gasoline. Rage, cold and pure, washed through him. These men weren't just here for her. They were going to burn down his world, everything he had left, everything Sarah had built. He raised the shotgun. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't give them a chance. He had given them their chance when he told them to leave his land. The first blast was deafening. It tore through the night, a roar of fire and judgment. He aimed high, at the barn wall above their heads. Splinters flew. The man with the torch screamed and dropped it, stumbling back. "What the hell?" The other two spun around, fumbling for their own weapons. Cole used the momentary chaos to move, ducking behind the water trough. The man with the ponytail fired a pistol wildly into the darkness. The shot went high, thudding into the side of the house. Cole heard a small cry from inside and his blood ran cold. He rose up from behind the trough. "Get off my property!" he roared, his voice a force of nature. The big man charged him, a tire iron in his hand. Cole didn't have time to aim. He fired the second barrel from his hip. The blast caught the big man in the legs. He went down with a sickening scream, clutching his shredded thighs. The man with the spiderweb tattoo raised his own gun, but Cole was already moving, closing the distance. He swung the empty shotgun like a club, a brutal, desperate arc of wood and steel. It connected with the man's arm with a wet, cracking sound. The gun clattered to the ground. The man howled in pain. Only the driver was left. He stood frozen for a second, his pistol wavering between Cole and the house. Then his nerve broke. He turned and ran, scrambling into the darkness, leaving his friends behind. Cole stood there, breathing heavily, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. The wounded man on the ground was moaning. The other was whimpering, cradling his broken arm. Cole walked over and kicked the pistol away from him. He looked down at them, his face hard and unforgiving in the faint starlight. "This is your last warning," he said, his voice ragged. "Take him and get out of here. If I ever see your faces again, I will bury you on this hill." He stood over them, a silent, menacing figure, until the one with the broken arm managed to haul his screaming friend to his feet, and they stumbled off into the night. Cole didn't watch them go. He turned and limped back toward the house, his whole body shaking with adrenaline and rage. He had crossed a line he never thought he'd cross again. He had met violence with violence, and he had done it to protect her. He found her right where he'd left her, sitting on the edge of the bed, the heavy rifle still across her knees. She hadn't moved. The only light in the room came from the sliver of moon through the window, tracing a pale line across the floorboards. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The tension hadn't vanished. It had settled, changed its shape. It was the quiet after a storm, thick with the smell of ozone and the knowledge that the landscape had been irrevocably altered. He stood in the doorway, the shotgun hanging loosely in his hand. He was covered in dust and sweat, and there was a dark smear of someone else's blood on his sleeve. He looked at her, and she looked at him. In her eyes, he didn't see the terror anymore. It had been burned away, replaced by something else, a raw, stark vulnerability. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Her voice was steady, a quiet thread in the vast silence. "No," he said. His own voice was a rasp. He leaned the shotgun against the wall and limped over to the wash basin in the corner. He poured some water from the pitcher and splashed it on his face, the cold shocking his system. He scrubbed at the blood on his arm until it was gone. He felt her presence behind him, and he turned. She was standing just a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at the bruises that were probably forming on his face, the deep exhaustion etched around his eyes. She looked at him not as a monster or a savior, but as a man who had bled for her. "I never told you my name," she said softly. The words hung in the air between them, a fragile offering. He had never asked. He had called her you, or hadn't called her anything at all. In his mind, she was just the girl. It was easier that way. It kept a wall between them. Now she was offering to tear that wall down. He waited, his heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. He watched as she took a deep breath, as if the words themselves had a physical weight she had to push out. "They called me Spider. Before that, they called me Girl. I think my mother called me Alara." She said the name like it was a foreign word she was trying to remember how to pronounce, a forgotten treasure she'd just unearthed. Alara. It was a beautiful name. It felt out of place in this harsh, ugly world. It was a name that belonged to a different story, a different life. He saw the hope and the fear in her eyes as she gave it to him. The fear that he would reject it or ignore it. The hope that he would accept it, and in doing so, accept her. He cleared his throat. He looked at her, at this woman who had drifted into his life like a piece of tumbleweed and had somehow taken root in its barren soil. He saw the scars, visible and invisible, but for the first time, he also saw the person underneath. He saw Alara. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Alara, he said. He spoke it quietly, testing the shape of it on his tongue. The simple act of saying her name was a vow. It was an acknowledgement. It was a promise that she was no longer girl or spider or a piece of property to be fought over. She was a person with a name. A tear, the first he had ever seen her shed, traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear. It was a tear of release. She had given him her greatest vulnerability, her true self, and he had held it gently. The silence returned, but it was a comfortable one now, a shared space. In the quiet darkness of the ranch house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the dangers of the present, a woman who had forgotten her own name had finally found someone to give it back to her. The next morning, the sun rose on a changed world. The threat of the men was gone, a bad taste in the air that was slowly fading with the wind. The greater change, though, was inside the small ranch house. There was a lightness that hadn't been there before. The saying of her name, Alara, had been like opening a window in a room that had been sealed for years. She made coffee, moving around his kitchen with a quiet confidence that was new. He watched her from his chair, his bandaged ankle propped up on a stool. She brought him a cup and their fingers brushed as he took it. A small, simple contact, but it felt charged with everything that had passed between them. It was an acknowledgement of their shared fight, their shared survival. After they ate breakfast in a comfortable silence, he pushed himself to his feet. "Come on," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He led her out of the house, his limp more pronounced in the bright morning light. He didn't head for the barn or the corral. He walked slowly toward the small lone hill that overlooked the property, the one with the single wooden cross. They walked up the gentle slope, Scrap trotting happily beside them. At the top, the whole ranch spread out below them, a patchwork of brown and green under a vast blue sky. He stopped in front of the simple, weathered cross that marked Sarah's grave. This was her favorite spot, he said, his voice quiet. She could see everything from here. The horses in the pasture, the garden, the sunset. She said it made her feel like she was watching over it all. Alara stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the grave, then out at the land. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled paper packet. He held it out to her. It was a packet of wildflower seeds. Sarah bought these the spring before the accident. She never got the chance to plant them. He looked at the patch of earth next to the grave. It was bare, exposed to the sun and the wind. "This spot needs something," he said. "Something that will hold the earth down. Something that will grow." He pressed the packet of seeds into her hand. "This is yours now," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "This little piece of ground. Plant something. Make it your own." She looked down at the seed packet in her palm, then back at him. Her eyes were shining. It wasn't just a handful of seeds. It was a gift of belonging. It was a promise of a future. It was a statement that she was no longer just passing through, no longer running. She had a place to put down roots. She knelt in the dirt, the rough fabric of her jeans scraping against the dry earth. With her bare hands, she began to clear the small patch of ground, pulling out the stubborn weeds and loosening the soil. He watched her, a man who had thought his life was over, watching a woman who had never had a life begin to build one. She carefully tore open the packet and sprinkled the tiny seeds into the soil she had prepared. She patted the earth down gently, her movements deliberate and full of a reverence he had never seen in her before. As she worked, a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the very first time. It transformed her face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He knew then that the ghosts of their pasts would always be there, silent companions on the edges of their lives. But here, on this windy hill, under the wide open sky, they were planting a seed of hope. A small, stubborn thing, just like them, determined to grow in the harshest of soils. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.